Politicians and some commentators have been consumed by a poll that suggests the ANC is currently below the 50% mark that it would need to stay in power next week. The poll was released on Tuesday by the Institute for Race Relations. It shows that their research says that only 49.5% of people want to vote for the ANC. It also says the DA is on 21.3% and the EFF is on 14.9%. The Institute does take care to say that this is a poll and not a prediction, and that voting intentions are still changing ahead of actual voting on Wednesday. The head of politics and governance at the IRR, the person in charge of this poll, who might have to take responsibility for it, is Gareth van Onselen. He's with me now. Gareth, good evening.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You've seen the fuss your poll has caused. There are plenty of other polls that have very different readings. Were you surprised by the results of your own poll?
Yeah, I was surprised by the ANC's decline from February. That's fairly atypical because the bigger parties tend to consolidate their vote as election day approaches, but I still think that's going to happen. I mean, the poll came out of the field with 14 days to go. We actually have the ANC on 51 on lower turnout, and I think it's going to move up steadily over the last 2 weeks.
I mean, to say that the ANC could fall below 50%, no one else is making that prediction. It's a big call. I realise it's not a prediction, but still yours, I think, is the only poll that suggested that.
Yes, we do have the ANC pretty much across all four of our polls lower than the other market research surveys do, and we have the DA higher than they do typically. That seems to be the differential.
Ipsos released a poll, you will have seen it. It has the ANC on 61%. I mean, there's a huge difference between your poll and their poll.
Yes, there is a big difference, and it's something to do with the kind of methodology. It's hard to say specifically what that is without seeing Ipsos's methodology in detail. I know that the one key difference is that we do generate a sample randomly through cell phones. They do it through using households as a sampling point. And somewhere between those two kind of things, someone has got it better than the other person. We'll have to wait and see who.
Almost everyone in this country has a cell phone nowadays. Do you think there's a big difference between the face-to-face interview and the cell phone interview?
Yes, well, it's how you use cell phones. So face-to-face surveys basically use households as sampling points and then work their way through members of the household before moving to another house. We basically use cell phones as sampling points. And, you know, there's a very high SIM card penetration rate, more than one user for every cell phone in the country, so you can use them as households in the same kind of way.
Okay. You and Marie Harris from Ipsos, you'll come into an SABC studio after all of this and we'll see who's done better than the other?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. The situation in Gauteng, I mean, in some ways this could be the story of the election. If the ANC loses Gauteng, it may not lose Gauteng. Your poll again has them below 50% there.
Yeah, significantly below 50%. We've got them on 42. They have improved by about 1.5% from February, where they're on 41, which suggests they might have bottomed out then and are starting to move in the right direction. Their problem is time. They haven't got much time to make up. 8% is a huge chunk of support. And they've been declining in Gauteng over years anyway. So the odds are against them, and it's looking more like coalition country, Gauteng.
How important is urban turnout? And I mean, turnout changes everything, really. Even in your poll, it seems that a lower turnout actually does better for the bigger parties?
Well, turnout traditionally favours the opposition parties in urban centres, of which Gauteng is basically a giant urban centre. They get a big differential advantage over the ANC because their base tends to turn out in higher numbers. And even at national level, the DA has a slight differential advantage in our latest polls, but in Gauteng it blows up really big. It goes all the way up to 39%, the DA, from 31 on a lower turnout. So those kind of environments benefit the opposition parties primarily.
That would suggest then that for the ANC, we're back to this situation where the key vote is people who used to vote for the ANC during the Mbeki years and didn't vote for the ANC in 2016.
Yeah, the one big difference in this election, I think, is the EFF. The EFF has basically taken a chunk of support out of the ANC, about 5 to 8% of alienated black voters. But the ANC can win them back. They're very fluid. They've moved between those two parties over the last 4 months. And when the ANC starts to apply the pressure in the last sort of 2 weeks of this campaign, you can expect the EFF to get badly squeezed and the ANC to eat up that support.
How does the ANC do that? I mean, rallies, obviously face-to-face campaigning. I mean, when it comes to face-to-face campaigning, no one has a better machine than the ANC.
Yes, they have a very powerful on-the-ground machine which moves door-to-door and does a lot of canvassing and events in people's communities. But there's also a natural tendency to gravitate towards the bigger parties in the closing of an election campaign. Undecided voters make up their mind and they tend to break in proportion to the electoral spread. So the ANC tends to get the majority of them and is very good at consolidating in those 2 weeks.
We talk about turnout in urban areas for the ANC and in Gauteng, but let's talk about turnout among young people. How important is that to the EFF?
Well, not as important as everyone makes out. The EFF, if you look at a demographic spread of its voters, does have some small amount that are significantly weighted towards younger voters, but it's nothing deeply significant. Certainly not disproportionately more than the ANC or the DA. It does have a bulge of support among students at university as opposed to postgraduates. But really, younger people don't vote in big numbers, and so to rely on them to make it up on election day is a bit of a risk.
Are you suggesting then that the EFF's average supporter is actually a bit older than the sort of public image?
No, they are a young party. I'm just saying that the proportion of young voters that they have, while it is weighted towards younger voters, is not massively more than it is for the DA or the ANC.
Okay, then the DA, turnout in the suburbs matters to the Democratic Alliance. I mean, that's where most of their voters are. Obviously, they would probably deny that, but I think we can accept that must be the case.
Yes.
There was a very high turnout in the suburbs in 2016,
yes.
And that probably was a vote against. It was probably a sort of fight-back vote against then-President Jacob Zuma. If turnout is lower in the suburbs, and there's some evidence that the sort of traditional white DA voter
yes.
is maybe not as enthusiastic as they were. Some commentators, Peter Bruce and others, are talking about voting for President Cyril Ramaphosa's ANC for the first time. If there's a lower turnout in the suburbs, that surely affects the DA.
Yes, it absolutely does. And I don't think the DA would deny that its support base is heavily weighted towards the suburbs, especially in a province like Gauteng. That's not to say it's not represented in townships, but the majority are in suburbs. And the DA's problem in this election has been its base. It's had to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get its traditional core base back on board. If it manages to do that, and we've got it polling at pretty much where it was in 2014, and then it's able to consolidate a bit in the last week or so, it could push up into the mid-20s.
If it doesn't, I mean, you know, all the previous Democratic Alliance leaders, and we've heard this again and again, Tony Leon, Helen Zille, they were able to increase the share of the vote. If Mmusi Maimane is unable to do that, could there be rumblings against him in the party? I realise you and he are not the best of friends.
Look, I think that there are a couple of scenarios for the DA. The one is some small growth, 2 or 3%, maybe on a good day 26%, which I think internally the DA will take as a huge triumph and enough to stick with the leadership it currently has and kind of muddle on. There's an argument to be made that's the most dangerous possible result for the DA given its kind of ideological ambiguity. Anything less than that, no growth or a decline, and then there are going to be big problems because there are a lot of people that have put away discontent and unhappiness for the sake of this election, and I think they're just waiting for an excuse to come out, and that would be it.
Gareth van Onselen, thank you very much indeed for coming in tonight. The head of governance and politics at the South African Institute of Race Relations. We'll find out on Thursday or Friday who's right.